but because America had the overwhelming military might and equipment, in the end, we were under the war was under U.S. command. Korean War was a UN-mandated effort, and I agree about Kosovo. That was a very limited war of 77 days from the air, without any boots on the ground. So the American military has had some successes, but it's, on the whole, a very mixed record. And I think the lesson is increasingly, let's not go to war. And less should we go to war as the years roll by because of economic stagnation since 1980 and because of a today economic decline where a $15 trillion debt is just being nibbled at the edges by Congress and is growing into, according to Standard & Poor's, which rates currencies, going into a $20 trillion debt, and that's why the dollar was degraded. And we cannot fight wars on Chinese credit. I think one of the bright things that Obama and Gates, Defense Secretary, did with the UN mandated no-fly zone over Libya was to say, okay, but we can't really do it. We can't lead, certainly, and we can't get really involved in even following those who lead. We might stay in the background and wish them well, and maybe someday we might decide to bail them out, but we didn't need to bail them out. Our allies did the job. And, yes?
I got a question. I really like what you said about stopping war by implementing peace through implementing human rights on Earth. But I have a question about the means to do that. How do you implement human rights on Earth when governments need to violate rights to exist? In other words, when
I don't think governments have to violate rights, human rights, in order to exist. And that human rights are the moral standard by which we judge governments, and governments should be brought to account if they do violate human rights. And so it's a difficult challenge, but that is the challenge of the world human rights movement. And human rights will never be perfectly realized on Earth. I'm an ameliorist, not an optimist. I think tomorrow can be made better today. I'm a member of the World Human Rights Movement, and I invite you to be a member of the World Human Rights Movement. I go by the United Nations Understanding of Human Rights. And my book, Human Rights Ethics, is really just an articulation and defense of United Nations human rights from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on.
Okay, but
I think Occupy is as a human rights movement too, in my own vocabulary.
Yeah. Well, for instance,
and in its own way, Tea Party is a human rights movement too. But there's some disagreement about the list of valid human rights.
Yeah,
which we needn't get into. It's not Pauletta's issue in this chapter, but
well,
it's our conversational issue right here.
I mean, there's some rights that I think we could probably agree on, right? Like,
I hope so.
Well, I can't come to your house and take your money from you.
True. Okay. Look, the right to your own property, if it has not been stolen, is a human right.
Okay, and so how do you resolve that with taxation?
This is an issue that was raised by a teacher of mine. I was the teaching assistant to the first libertarian presidential candidate in the history of the Libertarian Party, John Hospers, who died June 12th of this year at a very elderly age, but he continued to take an active role in the Libertarian Party and supported the Tea Party. Now, for Hospers, who got national fame because he became the philosophical tutor of Ayn Rand, and they had a falling out eventually because Ayn Rand only took the position that she needed no instruction from anyone else. But Hosper is a nationally noted philosopher, thought that if she wanted to be a philosopher, she needed to learn how to communicate better to fellow philosophers. Anyway, that was a whole... Greenspan was involved in that. He was a libertarian too, way back. And then Nathaniel Brand and other people of that era. But the Tea Party, and certainly the Libertarian Party, tends to believe that the fundamental human right is the right to the product of your own labor. That is the basic Lockean human right. Okay? That's not what the United Nations believes. That's not what I defend in my book. I defend as a central human right the First Amendment right to equal opportunity of freedom of expression in discussion and dialogue as a universal human right that is not realized yet on earth. And equal opportunity to contribute to dialogue in a collaborative search for the truth has to take place if it's equal opportunity on an even playing field. And that means that there are some in discussion, nationally and internationally, who are very weak, and there are others who are very powerful and rich. And I don't say that we all have to be equalized in wealth or income to be equally empowered in freedom of expression, but there is a certain minimal amount of economic empowerment that is necessary for some people who may be starving or or be homeless. If they are going to be able to participate on an equal playing field with others in discussion and dialogue and have their voice heard too and considered seriously in discussion and dialogue. So I defend the United Nations when it says that freedom of expression, freedom of speech is the number one central human right, but for that to be equally implemented among all human beings as a human right, and not just a right of the rich and powerful, we have to also recognize economic human rights. The right to a minimal, decent standard of living, the right to food, the right to health care, and the right to good education. And if it has to be funded by taxing those who are better off, so be it. Now, this gets a little bit off the track of Paletta, but should I finish?
Yes.
Yeah.
The line of reasoning?
Yeah.
Okay, first, take the idea of the right to the product of your own labor. Now, to some extent, that is justified. It is motivating, and because I believe in entrepreneurship, and if you didn't get rewarded at all by your labor, then I think you would be demotivated. So the United Nations itself recognizes.
I'm interested in knowing how do you derive a way to determine to what extent you have the right to the products of your own labor?
Well, that's what I wanted to address right now. I believe, contrary to libertarians, that the product of Steve Jobs' labor is a collective and social product. I believe that if Steve Jobs tried to start up his business with all his intelligence and with all his hard work and with all his spirit of adventure, if he had tried to do that in one of the poorest countries of the world, he would have never succeeded and become wealthy because, and I've been in one of the poorest countries of the world, Burkina Faso. I have a friendship with the former Minister of Human Rights in Burkina Faso, and there would be no body of consumers who could afford the things that Steve Jobs would invent and try to market. So he would, and I know exact examples of people who have tried to create jobs, entrepreneurial jobs that would earn them profit in Burkina Faso, and it just doesn't work for various reasons. First, people don't have any money to spend. Secondly, there's corruption everywhere. You have to pay bakshish. The government actually has no police. Near many villages, the policeman is 50 miles away. And so the village will stop you on the road and take bakshish so you can travel on. And then there's, you have to hand money right and left in the government to get anything done. And you have the extended family. As soon as you accumulate some wealth, then you discover you have 200 cousins with outstretched hands. And so actually my niece tried to create a enterprise in Burkina Faso. She's French, but she's half African racially and half white, and she failed because of these reasons. And Steve Jobs had failed. Therefore, Steve Jobs' success as an entrepreneur depends on the fact that he grew up and created his business in an affluent country with a very solid consumer population with purchasing power. And therefore, his wealth is a collective product. And therefore, since he owes his wealth to all those Americans that can afford to buy his products, his product was partly due to himself, but partly a social product. And that justifies society taxing part of his so-called product away, which is due to the surrounding affluence of American consumers.
Didn't he derive his wealth from the people who decided to exchange the fruits of their labor for what he produced for them?
Don't you realize that his success would not have occurred except in a society with affluent consumer population like in the United States?
On a smaller
That
level,
makes,
it would be, I'm sorry.
yeah, excuse me, well, I'm sorry.
On a smaller level, it would be like if I say okay, I'm from a poor black family from the ghetto, and I have the same intelligence and the same idea that you have, but you are from a rich white family. You're much more likely to succeed than I am, because you have more power and privilege than I do. So I could have the same idea, I could build the same machine. Yet, I'm probably not going to have the support of my family, the monetary support maybe to get it out there, to get a business started, whereas you are.
Like the inheritance.
So, yes. So you have this, I mean, and we could take that from the micro level to the macro level as countries.
Okay, well, let's
This
do that.
this is an additional point.
I'd like
The
to go
point
back
that
to
I
my
was making,
original
I
question.
think it's valid.
I'd like to go back to the original question, because I want to focus on that, because I think that's important to understand, is trying to figure out how you derive a point at which, okay, you've made this much money, now the products of your labor can be taken and go for something else. Like, how are you deriving the point
Again,
at
concentrate
which
on
what yours
the
isn't yours
concept
anymore?
of the product of your labor in an affluent society where there is a real market for your product is a social product. Now, once you understand that, then you'll understand the justification for taxation. That doesn't mean unlimited taxation. That doesn't mean taking everything you have. You should be rewarded for your contribution to the product of your labor. Another thing is that what you have as the product of your labor is that's a third argument. Your argument is valid. I think the social product is an important point. Thirdly, the so-called product of labor is to some extent dependent on plain luck.
So would you consider,
Plain luck. For instance, we don't know the future. Yes?
Would you consider that product owned by the populace then?
A collective product is co-owned by all members of the society where the product is produced and bought.
So I could calculate my share of the fruits of someone else's labor?
It's a
There's way to
difficult
do
calculation. Philosophers should not try to calculate that. We need
that? I wonder if
science.
the reason they can't calculate that is
Well,
because it's not calculable.
look, I mean,
In a
that
philosophical
requires social science and expertise that Nobel Prize-winning economists might have, but that you can't expect a poor philosopher like me to have. Don't say can't when we have not consulted the best minds in economics.
Another quick point that I'd like to add to this conversation is that I guess a fruit of your labor, a product of your labor, is a product of your labor. Steve Jobs, some of the products that he's created weren't just him in a tool shed building an iPod, or him in a tool shed, building an Apple product. There are other people that were involved in the design process, that were involved in the manufacturing process, that coded and scripted the firmwares and softwares. So that product in itself isn't his sole property, even though it was dictated by the way our government works, that through shares people could own the company or the product. He owned most of the shares, and because it was his idea or his intellectual property, everything under him, any product that was created by Apple becomes his property. And I don't think that's right
Legally.
either. Legally.
But not necessarily morally.
Morally not. Legally, yes. And that's something that I disagree with. I believe that if I say, hey, I have a great idea, let's make a website where people can go on the website and share their lives with one another, and and me and you both work on this website, then I don't think because it was my idea it should become my property. Because you helped me, it becomes both of our properties, and because of whoever helped us with the server space, it becomes their property.
Now,
so by that it becomes a community property between the people that helped create it.
That is an additional and, I think, valid fourth point. That the product is collective not only because it depends on purchasers of the product, it's also collective because the workers and skilled or unskilled employed by Steve Jobs have contributed to the value of the product.
And I don't think that consumers should play such a big part in moral ownership of a product, because if you go to an area where people are financially unable to purchase a product, the product itself should be formulated to fit the needs of the company, or the needs of the area. I'm not going to go to the poorest country in the world and start making them iPads.
But there's nothing that you could make to become a super billionaire to meet the needs of people in Burkina Faso. If you understand by need, economic demand backed up by purchasing power.
And I understand that purchasing power is an important player in whether or not a business succeeds or fails, but I don't think it should derive ownership of what's being created. Because if you can create something anywhere, I can go somewhere and make a business, whether or not it fails or not, whatever I've created and whatever me and him have created or anybody else in the group is still our property. We can take that and market it elsewhere. I don't think the consumers should be that big of a player as far as the ownership. I think that they could claim this could only happen in America, or this could only happen in a country like what we live in. But I don't think because of the social standings that are set in place or the financial availability of the product to the people should play a part in creating it.
Okay, we can maybe disagree about that, but I do believe that a sold product is a collaboration between a manufacturer and the purchasing public. But I also believe, and I think that goes a distance in justifying taxes.
I think the taxation goes in a way of thanking the consumer for participating in the circle of the product being created and sold. And I think that taking that money and using it to fund schools or street worker or roads and street departments and things like that, I think the idea of taxation is great. And I think thanking you for buying the product or using the website that me and this man created is wonderful, because then we profit from what we've created, and you still get back for participating in buying our product.
Right.
But I I don't think that.
Well,
should
you can
designate
disagree
you as
with
an
me.
owner of what we've
You may
created.
that's fine. You disagree with my point, but I agree with your point, which is that the product is a collective product in that others than Steve Jobs have worked for Steve Jobs and helped make that product. That's a very old point that was made by Karl Marx.
But
And,
they were compensated.
Not
for their
everything that Karl
contribution
Marx
to the
says is
product.
automatically wrong just because Karl Marx said it.
I don't understand that, because if I want to make a product and I say to you, come and assist me with making this product, I'll pay you $60,000 a year.
Mhm.
I pay you $60,000 a year to help me with my product. The agreement is that the product is my property when we're done. How can you then say, no, it's collective property because someone else contributed?
Well, I
talking
think
about moral
I think there is certainly co-responsibility, especially in a first-generation entrepreneur like Henry Ford I. Somewhat less so with incompetent CEOs of Ford Motor Company from the Ford family who had to be eliminated a few years ago. I think that if workers are needed to market a product, that they need to be rewarded for the contribution they make to marketing the product. But we can agree to disagree on
Isn't that
that.
what compensation is?
Huh?
Isn't that why they get paid?
Well, that's precisely, and that admits that the workers deserve something.
Yeah,
I don't say they deserve everything.
they get paid, but
Or we
what I
agree,
don't
when there's
understand
total
is-
agreement, then they should get paid for their contribution to the production.
Okay, yeah, we agree on that.
Well, then we have no disagreement. Yes?
I think I can resolve the disagreement, actually. The person, Steve Jobs, took all the risk. He gave up everything to try to make the Apple II, and he should be rewarded for being successful in that risk. His
Sure.
employees were publicly educated. His products are brought in his raw materials are brought in on public roads and railways. His facilities are generally zoned by the public. All of these other factors that allow, for instance, in the United States, for him to be successful, which don't exist in
Burkina Faso.
Yeah.
You're actually restating my point in a
allow
different
this
way.
to become a community product. Minimum wage is part of the problem with losing our middle class.
Mhm.
You can't reward an employee based on merit anymore, because even your worst employee has to make at least $7 an hour. For instance, if this guy's working circles around this other guy, I still got to pay. I can't pay him much more. I got to pay the guy who maybe I'll give him a quarter to sweep the parking lot. That's about all he can do, or whatever. And then I got another guy that's always there and on time for me and making me more money than this guy, but I got to pay him the same.
So,
This
I
gentleman
wait
here.
a minute.
Did you want to comment?
I kinda,
Yeah, he's been waiting for a while. Let him
It
go.
was different. It was
I
a
wanted to
different
go too.
train of thought entirely, though, from this part of the conversation. But I was going back to the original question he had on why it would be necessary to tax, or just the concept of taxation. I'm just thinking, if we didn't tax. Like how would we be able to pay for roads and schools without taxation, without taking that
Having
from people?
private tollways where you have to pay 50 cents for every mile or 10 miles, or
But
Well, it would
I
be
mean-
50 cents a mile. I mean, people aren't.
or
gonna
whatever,
use-
but it would be private tollways like we have the tollway in northern Indiana, and
Well,
the
if-
Chinese, I think, have leased it.
Australians.
Australians, okay, and
if everything, all public schools and everything that taxes pay for were privatized,
right, which is the trend in America now.
but I worry a lot if everything was privatized about ethical abuse of
Yeah.
systems.
The dormitories
like
at
that.
IPFW have been privatized. In older campuses, dormitories used to be built by the university, and they were more affordable, they were more Spartan, but there's more money to be made probably out of luxurious apartments that cost a lot of money. And at a campus like this, in many older universities, you had a university-run cafeteria. Here and at other Purdue campuses that I know about, Coca-Cola has sort of a monopoly over the snack machines, and there's no milk anymore because too much labor to replace sour milk, but Coca-Cola pays I don't know how much, maybe it's $1 million to the campus, and so the campus signs a contract with Coca-Cola, and then you wonder, do we have freedom of expression to attack this and attack Coca-Cola? We don't get enough state funding to run this university without private contracts.
Therefore, there'd be a lot of room for, like as I said earlier, ethical abuse there. When it's privatized and
I mean
outsourced.
I mean
Right,
this is
very
this
simple
is
with
the
medicine.
direction of America in the last 60 years. The idea of the liberal profession has gone out the window. Hospitals make you pay for huge billboards, say, to come to my emergency room. And would you, if you need an emergency, go to the advertised emergency room on the other side of town instead of the one closest to you? You pay for that.
I have a. Sorry, I have an example. The place where I work is I'm a custodian, and at Fort Wayne Community Schools. But if you're familiar with the situation at all, they had outsourced the Fort Wayne Community School custodians to a much larger company called Sodexo, where they are. It's basically the same amount of work, but for half as much money, without a union, and it's.
The other half of the
And we
money is-
privatized.
We're not-
We privatized prisons. We've privatized much of the work the military used to
not-
do. It was a lot cheaper for American soldiers to do much of this work that the private contractors are doing now.
Yeah, but the thing is that for the employees aren't getting paid nearly as, like, if you evaluate it, they're not getting paid as much as they are contributing to society. They're it's a lot of work, and you're getting paid a couple bucks more than minimum wage, and you take home.
I think we're all agreed on the philosophical principle that you should be rewarded for your achievement. The details of just what portion of the pie belong to X or to Y cannot be philosophically decided. It can only be decided by social science.